When Sam Kopchak went to check on his horses on October 18th, 2011, he found them huddled together in the far corner of the field, each of them acting skittish. As he looked over to his neighbour Terry Thompson's field, he could see that his horses were acting up also. In the centre of their field was a dark mass, hard to make out. That was until it began to move and Sam could tell it was a black bear. It was running away, so he wasn't too worried, but decided to take his horses in and report the incident. However, as he led his prized horse towards the barn, he saw something far scarier than the fleeing bear. Laying just the other side of a wire fence and looking directly at them was a full-grown male African lion. In today's episode of Well I Never, we look at the case of Terry Thompson, a man who released over 50 wild animals onto an unsuspecting city in Ohio. Terry Thompson was born in 1949 and grew up on a farm just outside the city of Zanesville, Ohio. By all accounts, his early life was good. He had attentive, caring parents and was well liked. He enjoyed the outdoors and joined the Boy Scouts, with his attention later shifting to fast cars, women and airplanes in his teens. This was the swinging 60s and Terry was making the most of it. Things would soon change though, as it would for many other young Americans during the middle of the decade. The United States' involvement in the Vietnam conflict was escalating, with many being drafted into the armed forces and sent to fight in one of the most brutal conflicts in modern times. Being young and single, Thompson ranked high on the draft list, and in the blink of an eye, he had gone from eyeing pretty girls in his fast car to mowing down Viet Cong in his position as a door gunner on board a Huey, thrust into a world utterly juxtaposed to the one he had left behind. One part of his job was to pick up and drop off soldiers normally while under heavy fire. He would also be involved in emergency medical evacuations, with there often being more dying and wounded than they could carry. His friend Phil Kress saying, "They could only get so many on the helicopter and they actually had to pry the fingers off the helicopter so they could get off the ground." Kress and many others that knew Thompson before he left say that his time in Vietnam changed him massively. Another of his friends, Chuck Spires, stating, "He wrestled with the biblical thing. I guess I'll never go to heaven because I killed people." There were some things about him that didn't change, however, and one of the first purchases upon returning to the States was a brand new Corvette. All he needed now was a woman, and he set his sights on one in particular, Marianne Sharp. Marianne came from a family of high social status, with her being an accomplished barrel racer and horsewoman. Despite the clashing backgrounds, they hit it off from the start, and their relationship would be one that would go on to last for several decades. The pair would eventually marry, with Marianne becoming a school teacher. She would also win several prizes for her horse riding. One critter she couldn't tame, however, was Terry. He opened up a motorcycle store, becoming the local Harley-Davidson dealer. Alongside the bikes and guns inside, you'd find an aeroplane on the roof and Dobermans wandering around the showroom. Despite the reputation he was building, trouble would still seek him out. His dealership had its windows smashed and was vandalized on several occasions, leading to Terry spending several nights laying in wait for the perpetrator. When the vandal eventually returned, Terry set upon him, beating him savagely. Fair enough, some of you may feel, and if it had ended there, that might have been the case. But when the man got up and tried to run away, Terry chased him down and continued the attack. Perhaps a flashback to his time in Vietnam and the kill or be killed nature of war. The man survived, however, and assault charges were brought, though these were later dropped. Despite the fiery side he had, his large group of friends would attest that Thompson was also very generous and loving, with his main issue being with those who wronged him and those in authority. He would eventually sell the motorcycle dealership, with him going on to have several ventures after that, to include operating as a pilot for a local millionaire. The next big turning point for this story happened in 1977. During his time in Vietnam, Thompson had befriended a monkey who he regularly fed and nurtured. This one, shining light during his dark times, left Terry with a desire to care for wild creatures, and in 1977 he acted upon those desires. He attended an auction for exotic animals, bringing home a new pet for his wife, a lion cub named Simba. She was ecstatic, and it wasn't long before the pair were racing to add to their collection, with there being stories of them driving home from Columbus with a bear cub sat over their lap, to having friends stay over with them, sleeping amongst a pride of lion cubs. Marianne even took a baby bear to her friend's 50th birthday party, where it promptly did on her carpet that which bears normally reserve for the woods. At the time, and even into the 2000s, if you lived in the States, getting your hands on an exotic creature was surprisingly easy and often very cheap. Some lion cubs would go for as little as $300. Less money than some pedigree dogs. There were very few laws around keeping these kinds of animals, with those in Ohio being particularly lax. As Terry and Marianne's menagerie kept growing, they sought to turn their collection into a business and soon began supplying animals for media events. They would provide big cats and the like for photo shoots with Newt Gingrich and Heidi Klum, amongst others, and also supply animals for corporate ceremonies. Despite not having the licenses necessary for moving animals out of state, the pair would often borrow those belonging to friends if pressured for them. Rumours also persisted that Thompson had begun selling animals illegally, with one person claiming that he sold a monkey for $3,500. His luck with evading the law ran out in 2005, but this had nothing to do with his exotic animal collection. Instead, he was sentenced to 6 months house arrest for animal cruelty relating to 3 cows and a buffalo he kept on his parents' land. All 4 creatures are said to have died from starvation. Around this time, neighbours would also often complain about animals escaping from his land, with one neighbour, Fred Polk, having several calves killed by a pair of Thompson's Rottweilers that had gotten loose. He apologised and told Polk he'd never see the dogs again. When the canines once again got onto his land, however, Polk shot them dead. A few years later, in 2008, Thompson would have another run-in with the law, but this time the consequences would be much further reaching. He was a man that enjoyed his possessions and would often not only brag about the rarities in his collection, but the mass of them, once claiming to have 138 cars, 138 motorcycles, and 138 guns. It would be the latter that would cause his life to spiral. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives had gotten wind of this haul of arms and had reason to believe that several pieces were illegal. They raided the Thompsons' home, seizing 100 weapons. The resulting legal action would drag on for the next 2 years, causing massive stress, both emotionally and financially, for Terry and Marianne. The couple, who had been a team for nearly 40 years, began to turn on each other, with Terry believed to have accused Marianne of alerting the authorities and turning him in. The case had shone a light not only on Terry and his guns, but also his collection of animals. Authorities and local zoos had previously attempted to prize his beasts away, fearing for their well-being, and with there being several escapes in the past, the safety of local population. With aspirations of starting a zoo of his own, Terry turned them down. Despite these aspirations, it seemed that by this stage he was merely hoarding the animals. Some of those that knew him would point to his other collections, motorcycles covered in dust and cars left rusting in the sun. The wild creatures simply being his latest mania, collecting them simply because he could. While the animals were in good health when checked upon, some cages were left in need of repair, and rumours began that their diets were being supplemented with roadkill, either in an effort to cut costs or simply not to see it go to waste. Things would go from bad to worse for Thompson in 2010 when he was sentenced to a year and 1 day in federal prison. While inside, his relationship with Marianne continued to break down, with her refusing to answer his calls. Marianne and a hired hand were now the only people responsible for the animals' well-being, and so she spent much of her time trying to meet their needs. Fast forward to August 2011, and Terry was moved to a halfway house ahead of an early release. He had planned to move back home with his wife once out, but was informed that she had told the courts that the pair would no longer be living together. Terry was released on September the 30th. Miles from home, he bought a bicycle and rode the 50 miles back to his house. The animals seemed to be in good health, but he told friends that he was upset as they had been moved around in the cages and he could no longer tell them apart like he used to. He also revealed to friends that he was struggling financially and that he had received an anonymous letter stating Marianne had been having an affair. Asked about the split between them, he replied, "She can just have it all. I'm gonna die." His friend then asked if he was ill, with Terry replying, "No, but you'll know when I go." October the 18th, 2011. 3 weeks after Terry Thompson's release, and neighbour Sam Kopchak is now face to face with one of his adult African lions. He manages to keep his cool and calmly walks his horse back to the stable, securing the door behind them. His first thoughts were to call the police, but he decided to call his elderly mother instead to let her know what was happening. She in turn called the police, but she was far from the only person to do so. Calls began pouring in from around the area, with people spotting wolves, lions, monkeys and Bengal tigers roaming freely. Deputy Jonathan Merry was the first officer to arrive at Kopchak's property, and while waiting for someone to answer the door, he spotted a large grey wolf running back along the main road. He got into his patrol car and followed the animal until it began walking up to a nearby house. The order soon came through to put the creature down, and Merry took the rifle from the boot of his car and shot the wolf several times. A call then came through informing Merry that his colleagues were dealing with a lion near the Thompsons' residence, so he made his way back. Spotting another deputy, he got out of his car only to spot a black bear heading his way.
It was coming right at me and appeared to have an aggressive look on its face.
With his rifle still in the car, he says the bear began to speed towards him. He took out his sidearm and shot the beast one time. It fell dead. Merry would then return for his rifle, shooting a lioness as she crawled under a fence. Over the course of the evening, he would kill 3 more lions, a tiger, another wolf, and a grizzly bear. By now, word had reached the vets at Columbus Zoo, some 40 miles away. Some of the staff there had been called out to check on Thompson's animals in the past, but none of them could have foreseen what was going to transpire. A team was put together to capture and recover whatever animals they could, armed with dart guns and regular weapons. Back in Zanesville and amongst the carnage, people are wondering where the owner of these wild animals is and just how many were on the loose. Sheriff Matt Lutz and John Moore, one of the animals' caretakers, searched the site. They found 2 monkeys and a dog still locked in their cages and worked out some 56 animals must be on the loose, but still no sign of Terry. That was until they began making their way back to the road where Moore spotted a body. It was that of Terry Thompson. It had been dragged a short distance and was partially unclothed and partially eaten, most likely by the white tiger that now sat guarding it. In an effort to reach the body and stop further animals getting past the perimeter, A shooting party was formed with several Muskingum County officers boarding a pickup truck and using it as a mobile platform to fire from. One big cat they came across was another male African lion who, when shot, ran for cover between Thompson's other abandoned collection, his rusting and weed-strewn cars. Amongst them, the lion laid down and passed away. With several more animals slain, the path was clear to Thompson's body. Found nearby was a gun he was believed to have committed suicide with, and a set of bolt cutters used to cut holes in the wire cages so animals couldn't easily be returned to them. This would lead to the death of several lionesses who, despite the exodus of animals around them, stayed in their cage. But when officers found they couldn't be secured, they too were put down. The zoo recovery team eventually arrived on the scene, but were virtually powerless. They were only allowed to attempt the tranquilization of one tiger, but when it began to thrash around after the dart hit it, it too was killed. When word got out of what was happening in Zanesville, the Muskingum County Sheriff's Office was inundated with calls from people infuriated with the way the situation was being dealt with. In all, of the 56 animals released, 49 would be confirmed dead, with 6 being recaptured. 3 leopards, 2 macaques and 1 grizzly bear, all still in their cages. 1 macaque was never found, but is believed to have been eaten by one of the big cats, though it may still be at large. The next day, more representatives from Columbus Zoo arrived. Among them was Jack Hanna. Hanna was director emeritus at the zoo and had presented several wildlife TV shows. Perhaps somewhat surprisingly, he backed up the action of killing the released animals, stating, "It's going to haunt me for the rest of my life. What happened here last night had to be done, or else we would have had some major losses of human life here this morning. And I won't forget what happened here today, as long as I ever live. I've seen poachers kill in the wild. I've seen animals killed right in front of me with their horns cut off. I've seen a lot of things happen in my career, but nothing like this have I ever witnessed." Hanna knew what damage wild predators can do. In 1972, a young child visiting his zoo had his arm bitten off by a lion after managing to pass a security fence. Hanna now planned to take the surviving animals away with him to Columbus Zoo, where they would be safe. He had one person standing in his way, however, Marianne Thompson. She was furious that Hanna was going to take her remaining animals away and planned to confront him. But when she saw the bodies of her once beloved pets piled high, she broke down with Jack Hanna consoling her. The bodies of the animals that had been shot were buried in a mass grave on the site, with the 6 surviving creatures being sent to Columbus Zoo. Sadly, while being moved from one cage to another, a steel gate fell on the neck of one of the surviving leopards, with him then being euthanized. The final 5 animals were later returned to Marianne Thompson. As for Terry Thompson, despite many conspiracy theories around his death, it seems to have been a suicide. After releasing the animals, he began to undress and was found with pieces of chicken around him. Seemingly, he wanted to be eaten, even telling a friend before his death that if he ever found out he was dying, he would stand in his tiger cage and shoot himself, as he wanted to be recycled. Since the incident, the lax laws surrounding the ownership of exotic animals have been tightened, though not without some pushback from owners who feel they go too far. So, what do you think of the tragic Zanesville animal release and how it was dealt with? Were the sheriffs too trigger happy in their dealing with the situation? Or did they do what was needed, considering the nearby homes and schools? Head down to the comments section and let us know your thoughts. If I might, while I still have your attention, I would also like to say a big thank you to all of our new subscribers. My goodness, We've had a bit of a surge lately, you might have noticed, with a lot of new faces getting on board, and I'd just like to let you know that we really, really appreciate it. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, well, I never.